Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce myself. I am Mordecai, a humble bard, a purveyor of tales and songs that have stood the test of time. Throughout history, we bards have been the keepers of legends, the chroniclers of heroic deeds, and the entertainers of kings and good folk like you alike. Speaking of legendary tales, everyone should have heard of the famous or infamous Dandelion, a fellow compatriot in the musical and storytelling arts. He's a bard himself, if that wasn't apparent, and known for his charismatic charm and entertaining anecdotes. I have had the pleasure of hearing one of his stories firsthand, and let me tell you, it was a tale for the ages. Now, Dandelion regaled us with a story of a brave warrior who faced off against a terrifying monster, armed with nothing but his wits and his trusty sword. With each word, the tension grew until the audience was on the edge of their seats, breathless with anticipation. But it wasn't just the plot that captivated us. It was Dandelion's masterful storytelling that truly made the story come to life. His voice rose and fell with the action, his gestures and expressions bringing the characters to life before our very eyes. It was a performance that we will never forget. So, if you have ever the chance to hear a bard like Dandelion perform, I highly recommend it. They, like myself, are true masters of their craft, and their stories have the power to transport you to another world, another time, and another life. Now here's a story from one of Dandelion's great tales about the witcher named Geralt and his battle against a chicken. Yes, a chicken. And it goes like this. So I heard this story from a friend of a friend who claims to have witnessed it firsthand. Apparently, there was this witcher named Geralt who was traveling through a small village when he stumbled upon a group of peasants who were in desperate need of help. Now, these peasants were being terrorized by a giant chicken. Yes, you heard that right. The giant chicken. It had apparently grown to an enormous size and was attacking anyone who came near it. So, Geralt, being the heroic witcher that he is, decided to take on the giant chicken. He drew his sword and charged at the creature, but to his surprise, the chicken didn't even flinch. It just stared at him into his soul with its beady little eyes. Realizing that he needed to come up with a new plan, Geralt asked the peasants if they had any ideas. One of them suggested that they lure the chicken into a nearby barn and trapped it inside. Geralt thought it was a good plan, so they set to work. They threw some grain inside the barn and waited for the chicken to follow. But when the chicken entered the barn, it realized it had been tricked and started attacking the walls in a fit of rage. Geralt, not one to be outsmarted by a chicken, quickly came with another plan. He threw a blanket over the chicken's head and grabbed it by the feet, then dragged it out of the barn and into a nearby field. The chicken now disoriented and confused, started running around in circles. Geralt, still holding on to its feet, was spun around like a top, much to the amusement of the peasants who had gathered to watch. In the end, Geralt managed to subdue the giant chicken and the villagers were able to live in peace once again. But to this day, they still laugh about the time they saw a witcher spinning around like a dervish with a chicken in his hands. As Geralt finally let go of the giant chicken's feet, it stumbled around and collapsed in a heap, panting heavily. Geralt wiped the sweat from his forehead and turned to the villagers with a grin on his face. Looks like you won't have to worry about that chicken anymore, he said, chuckling to himself. The villagers cheered and clapped, grateful for Geralt's bravery and quick thinking. They invited him to stay for dinner, but Geralt politely declined, saying he had other monsters to slay. As Geralt made his way out of the village, he couldn't help but think about how bizarre the situation had been. He had faced dragons, werewolves, and all sorts of creatures, but a giant chicken? That was definitely a first. Feeling pleased with himself for his handling of the giant chicken, he suddenly heard a loud popping sound behind him. Turning around, he saw that the chicken had transformed into a fearsome creature he had never seen before. It was a giant, fire-breathing lizard with scales as black as coal and eyes that glow with an otherworldly light. Geralt's hand instinctively went to his sword, but he knew that this was no ordinary beast. The creature let out a deafening roar and lunged at Geralt, its massive jaws snapping dangerously close to his face. Geralt managed to dodge out of the way just in time, and the lizard crashed into a nearby tree, sending splinters flying everywhere. Thinking quickly, Geralt remembered a spell he had learned long ago. He began to chant under his breath, his eyes aglowing with inner fire. The lizard snarled and lunged at him again, but this time Geralt was ready. With a flick of his wrist, he unleashed a blast of magical energy that hit the creature square in the chest. The lizard let out a high-pitched shriek and began to shrink, its scales turning a sickly green color. When the transformation was complete, Geralt couldn't believe his eyes. The giant lizard had turned into a tiny, harmless toad. Geralt couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. He had thought he was done with the giant chicken, but it seemed that fate had other plans. As he picked up the toad and examined it closely, Geralt couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the world had in store for him. Geralt then mounted his horse and rode off into the distance, the tiny toad in his hand. As he got some distance away from the village, he got into thinking. He knew that the sudden transformation of the giant chicken into a fire-breathing lizard and then into a tiny toad was no mere coincidence. He had a hunch that there was something more to this bizarre creature than he initially thought. With the toad safely stowed away in his satchel, Geralt turned his horse around back to the village and set out to investigate the origins of this strange creature. After weeks of tracking down leads and interviewing witnesses, he finally discovered the truth. It turned out that the creature was a cursed chicken, transformed by a powerful sorcerer who lived deep in the nearby mountains. The sorcerer had been seeking revenge against the villagers who had banished him from the midst years ago by seeing him having some fun time with one of their chickens. And the sorcerer had cursed the chicken as a way of getting back at them. Geralt knew that he couldn't let this curse continue to wreak havoc on innocent people. So he rode to the sorcerer's lair, sword in hand, and prepared to do battle. The fight was intense, but in the end, Geralt, as always, emerged victorious. He broke the curse and freed the chicken from its magical prison, restoring it to its original form. The sorcerer in question was banished to an institution to help people overcome their unnatural urges to mate with farm animals. As Geralt made his way back to the village with the now normal chicken in tow, he couldn't help but reflect on the strange and wondrous things he had encountered in his travels. The world was full of magic and wonder, but also danger and darkness. But he knew that as long as he remained true to his principles and fought for what was right, he would continue to make a difference in the world, one monster at a time. And as for the chicken, well, it was last seen living out its days in peace, clucking contentedly in the village square, where it had become something of a local legend. And that, my friends, is the tale of how Geralt the Witcher defeated a transforming chicken. It may sound like a fable fit for children, but I assure you it is a true account of the Witcher's exploits. Now let us raise our glasses to Geralt, who continues to amaze and astonish us with his bravery and ingenuity. May his legend live on for generations to come. But enough of that for now. I see the night has grown old, and the embers in the hearth are beginning to fade. It is time for me to bid you all farewell. Thank you for your patronage, your applause, and your laughter. May we meet again soon, and until then, safe travels. Good night, my good friends.